Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Today's press conference with Green MPs Paul Manley and Jenica Atwin and guest Vancouver City Councillor Swanson will now begin. La conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui avec les députés verts Paul Manley et Jenica Atwin et leur invitée conseillère municipale de Vancouver, Swanson, va maintenant commencer.
Well, thank you so much, Rosie. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo First Nation, and Nanaimo Ladysmith falls within the traditional territories of Nanaimo, Snanawas, Staminas, and Liaxin. Today, we're talking about affordable housing and predatory investment practices in the housing market in Canada, and this is a very important issue in my riding, and in particular for Indigenous people. We know that there is a housing crisis on reserves and communities across Canada, Indigenous communities across Canada, and that there's a disproportionate number of people who are Indigenous who are homeless in my community, and there's a need for housing for urban Indigenous people in this community. Housing, lack of proper housing and poverty are the #1 reason why children are apprehended by the child welfare agencies. And so it's very important that we have affordable housing available to people. On February 5th, I dropped a motion in the House of Commons, tabled a motion, motion number 66 on housing affordability, and that it's a national crisis affecting every part of Canada. We know that 1.8 million Canadians spend more than 30% of their income on rent, and 800,000 of them spend more than 50%. 2.4 million Canadians experience core housing need in 2020. And there are hundreds of thousands of homeless people across Canada right now, and there are hundreds of thousands more who are on the verge of homelessness. We have seen in British Columbia and in Toronto and other major centers, the use of residential real estate for money laundering and for tax evasion by the world's wealthy elite. And this has driven up house prices in our bigger centers. It's actually spread out into other parts of the country. And at the same time, we've seen predatory investment from hedge funds, from real estate investment trusts that don't pay the same rate of tax as other corporations. They pay an equivalent of 0.2% effective tax rate on the residential properties that they rent out. And we've seen these big investors come in and buy affordable housing stock, clear everybody out. If there's rent controls and no vacancy controls, they clear everybody out, and then they do renovations and then jack up the rents and open up those buildings again. And in places where there is no rent control, they just jack up the rents. And so many Canadians are struggling. And at a time when people are struggling with COVID-19, with the pandemic, with the lockdowns, this is particularly problematic. We've seen in Ontario, some 13,000 eviction notices have gone out in the last 3 months in the Greater Toronto area alone. And this is happening across the country. And today joining me is Jenica Atwin, who is the Green Party Member of Parliament for Fredericton, who will talk about the issues in New Brunswick and Eastern Canada, and Swanson, who is a Vancouver City Councillor in Vancouver, who will talk about the motion that Vancouver City Council passed. So in my motion, I am asking for a number of things. That we recognize housing affordability and homelessness are a twin crisis in Canada. And we need to redefine what affordable housing that definition is, because what is affordable, for one person is not for another. We need to remove the tax exemptions for real estate investment trusts. We need to do more to regulate foreign investment in our residential real estate market. We need to have restrictive covenants on affordable housing that is purpose-built with taxpayer subsidies to ensure that those housing units remain affordable. The federal government has gotten back into the housing game. They're doing some great things, But one of the things I have a problem with is the rental construction finance initiative, where after 10 years, those affordable units can be kicked into market rate units. So we're just moving affordable housing down the road. That's something that needs to be fixed. We need to have national standards to establish rent and vacancy controls across this country to protect renters. And we need to create an empty home tax for foreign and corporate residential property owners that leave buildings and units vacant. And we need to protect the existing affordable rental stock and invest in nonprofit and cooperative housing. That is the model that is going to be sustainable into the future, and that's what we need to do. So I'm going to pass it to Jean Swanson, who is a city councillor for Vancouver, and I'll let you talk about your motion, Jean, and about the housing crisis in Vancouver.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul, and thanks for bringing that motion about housing crisis across the country. It's really important. In Vancouver, we have a huge affordability crisis. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is about $2,000 a month. We also have tens of thousands of units of older apartments with long-term tenants that are way more affordable than the new ones. And last month, 2 real estate investment trusts bought 15 apartment buildings that have about 600 renters in them. After doing a little research, I found out that the real estate investment trust business model, as you said, is to raise rents so they can get more return for their investors. So last week, Vancouver City Council passed a motion instructing the mayor to write to the feds to express concern about a growing share of units that real estate investment trusts and other big investors own across the country, and their impact on the human right to housing, the commodification of housing, housing security, and affordability for Vancouver residents. And also that we ask the feds and the province to take more measures to protect and reinvest in existing rental stock and to facilitate their acquisition by nonprofits and co-ops. So yeah, as you said, the real estate investment trusts have tax advantages, and it just seemed like there's no way, if you think that housing is a human right, which the Liberal government claims it is, there's no way that you should be giving a tax advantage to somebody that commodifies a human right. Also in Vancouver, as I think across the country, homelessness is completely out of control. I've been involved in anti-poverty work for 45 years. I have never seen homelessness as bad as it is right now. And one of the main reasons is because there's very little consistent federal money for people who are homeless. If we had enough money in Vancouver for 600 modular units a year for the next 4 years, I think we could get a handle on homelessness. But we need that kind of consistency for funding, and we need a real commitment to house everyone who is homeless, not just to house people who are chronically homeless, whatever that means, within 10 years. We could do it faster as part of a COVID recovery strategy. We could do it way faster. You can't say that housing is a human right like the government does and then not provide the means to actually implement that right, or your words are meaningless. So yes, we have a huge housing emergency in the country, and we need to have a discussion about it. But more importantly, we need action to redesign and fund proper policies so everyone has a nice home that they can afford. Did you want me to talk about the vacancy tax now, Paul?
Sure, you can mention the vacancy tax and how that's working in Vancouver.
Yeah, in Vancouver, we have this municipal tax called the Vacancy Tax. This is the 3rd year of it. And what it is if you have a house or a residence that's vacant, you have to pay a tax on it. And over the last 2 years, we've gotten about $61 million from that. And so that's one advantage, is we get money from it, and we use that money to put into making housing, social housing, more affordable for people who need lower rents. And the other advantage is that in order to avoid paying the tax, people put their homes on the market and rent them so that we have more supply. So I think it's a good tax. It's a good model. And this year we just raised the amount from 1.25% to 3%. So hopefully we'll get a little more money or have more housing be rented.
Thank you, Jean. When we talk about building more affordable housing, one of the things that we need to do is deal with the structural issue around the existing housing stock. And I've seen statistics that show that, just one real estate investment trust alone is taking 14,000 units out of the affordable housing stock per year and bumping that into higher market rates. And so, it's unrealistic to think that taxpayers can deal with this alone without regulation, without regulation in the market, and without proper taxation of the investors that are involved. In Nanaimo here, we've seen a real boom in people coming from elsewhere to live here during COVID especially. There's a lot of people retiring here. But people are now escaping condo living in Vancouver to live in this area. And of course, we have a lot of snowbirds who've come here this winter. So we have a very low rental vacancy rate. And I understand, Jenica, that you have similar issues in New Brunswick. So I'm going to pass it to you to talk about the situation in New Brunswick and about the lack of rent and vacancy controls there.
Yes, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jean, as well for your comments today. And certainly happy to add kind of the East Coast perspective. So I'm joining today from the unceded territory of the Wolastoq-Gouyok on the banks of the beautiful, bountiful Wolastoq River in Fredericton. And Fredericton is indeed a beautiful place. We've got a great balance of urban amenities and access to nature. So through the pandemic, it's been also amongst the safest cities in the country. So it has a reputation for having a low cost of living, although that's been changing now for quite some time. Our increasing cost of living was further exacerbated last spring, obviously, when COVID-19 arrived in Canada and brought about what we're calling kind of a perfect storm of conditions that have generated real housing insecurity and increased rapidly the number of homeless people in our community, in large part due to job losses and financial insecurity, but it led to individuals who couldn't make the rents. At the beginning of the pandemic, the province of New Brunswick implemented an eviction freeze, which was great to see, but it only lasted until May 31st of last year. And since that time, tenants have been on their own. The increased burden on community services like food banks, community kitchens, homeless shelters has run up against COVID-19 physical distancing measures, meaning that those who've fallen through the cracks of our social safety net are not even able to count on private community services to meet their needs as they had before. So adding insult to injury is the financialization of the human right to housing, which has swept across Canada and landed soundly in New Brunswick. As urban Canadians seek safer places to live, through the pandemic, there's a new market for higher income rentals, and we are seeing affordable housing flipped for higher income tenants, leaving their previous tenants with a dwindling pool of affordable units. We have no rent controls in New Brunswick. We are the ideal target for real estate investment trusts. In good news, we have seen, federal dollars flowing into communities to fund housing projects, which is wonderful. And money is good, but it's not enough. We need leadership. And there really are simple solutions, I think, that can slow down the impact of the REITs on our communities and to protect tenants. So some of these would include max rent increases that are tied to inflation, rent increases that are tied to the unit, not the tenant, tie REIT tax rates to the amount of affordable housing they are providing, tax them like corporations and not mutual funds, immediately stop the CMHC from funding them with government mortgages. So I mean, Jean, you touched on this perfectly, that housing is a human right. So to commodify this, we talk with landlords. There's supply and demand. We understand that, but this is a kind of a different situation when this is about humanity. So what does it say about us? I think when this becomes the issue that it is currently. So this is a crisis in Fredericton, as it is a crisis in communities across the country. And I am proud to join my voice with that of my colleague Paul Manley and the City of Vancouver to declare housing affordability a national crisis.
Thank you, Jenica. I could go over a whole bunch of stats that I've gleaned from across the country. Of course, in Nanaimo, Ladysmith, we have one of the highest highest rate of homelessness per capita in Canada. But I'm going to pass it to you, Rosie, for questions in case there's journalists here that would like to ask questions of us.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. So we'll go to questions. We begin with one question, one follow-up. Nous allons commencer les questions. Une question, un suivi. Does anybody have a question for MPs Manley, Atwin, or Ms. Swanson?
Hi, Paul. Kendall Hansen here from Czech News. Just, I've missed some of your comments off the top, so I'm sorry if this question is repetitive, but just what are you proposing we do? I mean, lots of people have are deriving income from real estate income trusts. How do you foresee a transition from the current reality to what you'd like to see in the future?
Well, I think the government needs to revisit these income trusts and start to tax them, and to transition, so that we're as Jenica was saying, that we stop putting CMHC money into real estate investment trusts, and we do need to transition out of how we're working with taxation for them, but it needs to happen, and it needs to happen soon, because right now we're seeing them acting in a very predatory way. And also, what I mentioned about the housing initiative, the rental construction financing initiative, those units that we are subsidizing as taxpayers, those units need to have covenants on them so that they remain affordable units into the future, not just 10 years, because that's just kicking the can down the road. So there's parts of the National Housing Strategy that I like. We've got the Rapid Housing Initiative, which was well oversubscribed. There was $1 billion, $500 million went to municipalities, the largest cities, and another $500 million went to smaller municipalities and to projects. That second half was oversubscribed by $4.2 billion in applications. So over 600 and some applications for that initiative. So it's clearly not enough. And the rental subsidy program to help low-income renters is important as well. But again, that's a taxpayer subsidy that is going to corporate landlords in a lot of cases. So we need to deal with the predatory investment. And we've had this legacy of tax evasion and money laundering. In 2018 alone, it was some $5 billion was laundered through Vancouver real estate alone. And in Toronto, over a 10-year period, $25 billion went through unregistered mortgage companies that didn't need to report to FinTrack. So there's all of this money that has come into our real estate market, and people who are involved in tax evasion and money laundering, I don't think they make the best landlords. They're already involved in nefarious kind of activities, and they're obviously not really going to care about the tenants in the buildings that they own. So we need to deal with this kind of predatory practice, and that means rental and vacancy controls. So we don't have vacancy controls in British Columbia. We need that so that between tenants, the landlords can only increase the rent by so much, and they have to justify increases based on any updates that they do, any renovations, and they need to justify those renovations as well. So they can't just be updating older buildings to put them into a higher end market and clearing out tenants.
Okay, thank you.
The thing, if I could just jump in here, the beauty of vacancy control is that it's virtually free. Like we're saying, we need so much money to build housing for people who are homeless. We need so much money for building co-ops and nonprofit housing for people that can't afford market rents. But with vacancy control, with just passing a law and saying you can't raise rents as much as you like when the tenant leaves, we could maintain the low rents that exist in a lot of apartments, and it would be a win-win for just about everybody.
One of the things I liked about your motion, Jean, was talking about protecting existing affordable stock and then having the government invest in that affordable housing stock and then having it acquired by nonprofits and cooperative housing. because
Yeah.
that is the model that protects affordable housing, and we really need to focus on that. Cooperatives, I'm a big believer in cooperative housing and cooperatives in general, but those are communities, and you know, it's based on income, the rate that you pay. And so if you lose your job, you don't lose your home. If you retire, you can age in place in a community with young families. And those co-op communities are communities. And I think that we need more funding for that model. It's a good, strong model for community and for affordability. Any other questions?
Thank you. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Are there any more questions, please? No more questions? Well, thank you everybody for attending. This will end press conference. Merci. Ça conclut la
thank-
conférence de presse.
Thank you.
so
Thank you very
much.
much. Thank you,
Nice to
everybody.
meet you guys.
Yeah, thanks for joining us,
Keep up the
Jean.
good work.
You
Uh,
too.
See you in Parliament, Jenica.
Yes, yeah.
Virtual Parliament. Okay, take care.